Hello again, class. This is Dustin Edwards. Thanks for listening to my oral report. I kind of just want to talk to you and walk you through my analysis. I knew when I saw the genre analysis assignment that I wanted to do it on social media, but I wasn't quite sure how to apply it in a way that made sense. But then Dr. Thatcher mentioned analyzing news websites, so I thought it would be kind of interesting to look at how news organizations are using Twitter to communicate to their readers. So let me tell you a little bit about my background. That will probably make more sense as to why I chose this genre. Uh, my BA is in journalism from New Mexico State University. I worked in the field as a student journalist, an intern for a few years while going to school, and during my last year, I actually was an editor for the school paper, and I tried Twitter out for the first time there, but I didn't really know how to use it effectively. Every so often, I would just kind of send out questions, hoping for some response from the NMSU community. And although I got an occasional response, I think a deeper analysis into Twitter and how other organizations are using Twitter would have been helpful for my job then. So this report would have been helpful like a year or two ago when I was doing that job. But c'est la vie, we are here now. So before I get into my analysis, I thought I'd talk briefly about how and why people use Twitter. So for those of you who haven't used or played around on Twitter, it is branded as an information network. So people use Twitter in various ways. Some update or what is called tweet frequently, almost as a form of blogging. Others log on to Twitter to get updates from the people or organizations they follow, but most use it in a combination of those two ways. Like I said, posts are called tweets in Twitter vernacular. Tweets must be 140 characters or less. They're just kind of alphabetic text, no HTML code or video or images, just text. And as you probably noticed in my analysis, Twitter is chock full of jargon. So I attached in an appendix some Twitter vocabulary, which might be helpful. I think it's interesting to note that some of the jargon and procedures used in Twitter were created by the users themselves. So users play an interesting role in Twitter. Although there appears to be rigid constraints on the user, there is still quite a bit of room for human agency. So college newspapers and other news organizations use Twitter to essentially post headlines. Most of the time they have a link to their main website for a fuller discussion of a story. And I included this quote on the bottom right, which I found on Twitter's About page, mainly because I think it's interesting that Twitter markets itself as a news source. These are the feeds that I chose to analyze. I try to pick a variety of colleges based on proximity, prestige, and use. For example, I analyzed the Columbia Missourian, the University of Missouri newspaper, because it's one of the top journalism schools in the country. I also chose to analyze the Roundup because they have not tweeted much since I worked there, and I thought it would be kind of interesting to look to see what they're doing now. Let's see. So right now I kind of want to show you what Twitter looks like for those of you who don't really know. So this is an example of what my Twitter stream looks like during a particular time of the day. Notice how there are a variety of tweets from different users all around the same time of day. The Michigan Daily is one of the newspapers I analyzed, and if I were to click on the username, I will get directed to their Twitter page, which is a reverse chronological list of all their tweets. That looks like this. So this more or less is what Twitter looks like. So now I kind of want to switch gears and briefly talk about Birkenkotter and Huckin's 5 principles. I'm just going to kind of touch on these briefly because I elaborate more in the paper about these. So although news is still available in all these formats, this is kind of a linear progression of where news is given. So it started off in printed newspapers, moved to internet websites, and now you can find it on social media such as Twitter. So really, this genre is a direct response to what audience have asked for in news organizations. Today, people want to have access to news at all times of the day. So the internet has provided that vehicle for this want or this need. Now readers do not have to wait and read about today's news on a fixed paper that's published tomorrow. Also, people seem to want their news interspersed with social and personal communication. They want to be able to share stories with their friends. So Twitter allows for this interaction. And I was kind of thinking, it reminds me of how my grandmother used to clip out newspaper stories for me when I was younger and say, oh yeah, read this. Twitter is kind of the same thing, just faster. So I attempted to lay flexibility out pretty well, pretty clearly in my analysis. I hope I did. What I found is that Twitter as an overall form is pretty rigid. There are character limits, like I mentioned, and also other limits, like you can't post images or video directly in a tweet. But even though there are these extreme form limitations, people can use Twitter in a number of different ways. So news organizations as a subgenre also use Twitter in quite a few different ways. So even though Twitter has been around for 6 years, quite a bit of change has occurred both in terms of material possibilities and emotional and volitional possibilities. For situatedness, I found a lot of parallels in news discourse and Twitter feeds. For example, the grammar and style of the newsroom are pretty closely mimicked on Twitter. You won't see like a letter B and a number 4 for the word before, for example. So, and everything is pretty structured grammatically as well. Also, I found that journalists' values are often represented in the form of tweets as well. So, for example, you'll see impact, common news value in Twitter. So college journalists will tweet about information that impacts the community they report for. As I mentioned, the form of Twitter is pretty fixed and rigid, but I did find quite a bit of variability in content. Of the feeds I analyzed, I repeatedly saw these categories of content. So open-ended headlines, just tweets and invite readers to find out more. Basically just directing traffic to the newspaper's main website. Closed headlines kind of don't need any further explanation. They're just kind of fixed in there. Questions or inquiry, these are just trying to get responses from people. They could use the @reply feature on Twitter. Live blogging, it's kind of a series of tweets that are related to one another. That all are talking about the same thing. And in-house information, this is kind of one of those catch-all categories I came up with. It could be something like advertising for when an event's going to happen or when the paper is going to come out, or for something that the newsroom is divided on and they want just to mention that to their readers. And then another interesting thing that I saw content-wise was retweets, and that's basically just forwarding a tweet from another user. So most of the time, college newspapers would do this with credible news sources or direct news sources. For duality of structure, I found that Twitter mimics social structure of newsrooms in a couple of ways. One way that I saw was sectionalizing. In the newsroom, people are usually sectionalized into different departments. So you'll have your opinion department, your arts department, your news department. And in many ways, the tweets represent that same structure. So at the beginning of a tweet, it'll say, opinion, and then list an opinion of a columnist or an editorial or something like that. And then I also found that there are several subsection Twitter accounts. So like the Daily Wildcat would have like a sports subsection, and that kind of mimicked that same structure of the workplace. Community ownership. I found that this genre assimilates journalistic norms in a couple of ways. And so in my analysis, I applied news values to Twitter, and I kind of got more into detail there. And I also saw that retweets was something kind of interesting when compared to community ownership. So in the newsroom, you would only quote credible sources or direct sources, and the same thing goes for retweets. On Twitter, journalists will only retweet credible or direct sources. And that's kind of all I've prepared for you today. So any questions or comments or feedback on my analysis would be awesome. And I really thank you for your time, and I appreciate your feedback. Thank you.